My daughter's 7 words were a whisper that shattered a criminal empire. But before that, there was only the sound of their laughter. It was just another Tuesday of being the office ghost, the woman who fetches the coffee, gets talked over in meetings, and whose name is mysteriously forgotten on company-wide emails. I'm Elena Harper, a mid-level data analyst at Sterling Price Incorporated, a place where your value is measured by the sharpness of your suit and the ruthlessness of your ambition. I had neither. The laughter was a sharp, ugly thing, bouncing off the polished glass walls of the open-plan office. It was aimed at the small, quiet girl I'd been forced to bring with me to work, my 10-year-old daughter Aisha. That laughter echoed, cruel and careless, right up until the moment she spoke. 7 words. That was all it took for a visiting FBI agent, a man who seemed carved from ice and pure composure, to freeze solid, his face a mask of utter shock. What she said would not only unravel a conspiracy that reached the very top of my company, but it would also force me to confront a devastating truth about my own past. A truth so profound it would bring our entire world to its knees. Before I continue, make sure to subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, comment below, and leave your like. It helps a lot. Life at Sterling Price was a relentless masterclass in looking the part. On the surface, we were a sleek, cutting-edge logistics and data firm. The image was flawless. Gleaming mahogany desks, state-of-the-art ergonomic chairs, and the constant quiet hum of powerful servers processing endless streams of information. But beneath that veneer of corporate perfection, it was nothing more than high school with better suits and bigger paychecks. The cliques, the gossip, the casual cruelty, it was all there. I was a data analyst and I was good at my job, but I was terrible at the politics. I couldn't play the game. So I learned to make myself small. I kept my head down, focused on the numbers, and counted every single minute until I could escape back home to the one person in the world who made any sense. Aisha. I adopted Aisha 3 years ago. She was a brilliant, soulful child who saw the world in ways I never could, but she was painfully, heartbreakingly shy. Her past was a locked box, sealed tight. Her adoption records were a fortress of redacted lines and legal jargon, sealed with a kind of bureaucratic finality that always felt less like a protective measure and more like a dire threat. She communicated more with her sketchbook than with her voice, filling page after page with intricate, cryptic symbols and the faces of people from a world only she could see. Her silence wasn't empty. It was full of stories she couldn't or wouldn't tell. That particular Tuesday, her school had to close unexpectedly for a major water main break. And to make matters worse, my regular babysitter was down for the count with a nasty flu. I was out of options. With a critical project deadline looming, I had no choice but to bring Aisha into the office. I found an empty cubicle in the corner, a small gray box, and set her up with her sketchbook and colored pencils, praying that for a few hours she could become as invisible as I was. Of course, at Sterling Price, nobody is truly invisible. You're either a predator or your prey. The sharks began circling almost immediately. The first was Mark, a senior manager with a predatory smile that never ever touched his cold, calculating eyes. He sauntered over and leaned against my cubicle wall. His presence an invasion of my space. "Playing secretary today, Harper," he sneered, his voice dripping with condescension. "Didn't realize, bring your kid to work day, was for the serious professionals." His words were meant to sting, to remind me of my place. A few minutes later, Brenda, the office's self-appointed queen of gossip, glided over. "Oh, Elena, she's so quiet," she cooed, peering over the partition at Aisha, who was visibly trying to shrink into her chair, to disappear into the worn fabric. "Does she even talk? My niece never shuts up. It's just so strange for a child to be that silent, don't you think?" My face burned with a hot, shameful fire. I mumbled some weak excuse about her being shy, hating myself for not standing up, for not telling them to get lost. I was ashamed that I wasn't defending my daughter. Instead, I was playing the part they had assigned me. Agreeable, quiet Elena, the woman who never makes a fuss. The laughter started then. It began as a low conspiracy between Mark and Brenda over by the expensive coffee machine, but it was just loud enough for me to hear every single word. Probably a tough background, Mark said, his voice a stage whisper. Adopted. You never really know what you're getting with them. Brenda's reply was immediate. Exactly. It's such a gamble, isn't it? Look at her just staring at that paper. It's a little creepy. Every word was a physical jab, landing with precision. Guilt was a living thing, clawing its way up my throat. I should have screamed at them. I should have stood on my desk and listed every single one of Aisha's amazing qualities. But I was frozen, paralyzed by that toxic workplace fear, the dread of making a scene and drawing even more unwanted attention. Adding to the day's oppressive tension was the silent presence of the FBI agent. Agent Miller. He was supposedly here for what our CEO, Mr. Davenport, had cheerfully called a routine security audit. He was a tall, granite-faced man in a perfectly tailored, unassuming suit. He moved through the office with a quiet, unnerving purpose. His sharp eyes missing nothing, cataloging every interaction, every hushed conversation. We had all learned to ignore him. Just another suit in a sea of suits. Until he wasn't. Mark and Brenda, growing bolder from my lack of response, walked right over to the empty cubicle where Aisha was sitting. Mark leaned down, his voice slick with false charm. So, what's the big art project? Let's see what the little genius is drawing. He reached a hand out, aiming for her sketchbook. Aisha flinched back as if she'd been struck, hugging the book tightly to her chest. Her eyes, wide with panic, shot to me a desperate, silent plea. That was it. That was my breaking point. Mark, that's enough, I said. My voice trembled, but it was firm. Leave her alone. He just laughed, a short barking sound. Relax, Harper. We're just being friendly. And that's when it happened. Aisha looked up, not at me but right past me at something across the office. Her fear seemed to evaporate, replaced by a cold, unnerving focus I had never seen in her before. Her voice, when it came, wasn't a whisper. It was clear, steady, and it cut through the hum of the servers and the murmur of the office like a blade. The chimera sleeps in the house of Janus. 7 words. The entire office went dead silent. Mark and Brenda just stared at her, their smug, mocking faces melting into slack-jawed confusion. But I wasn't looking at them. My gaze was fixed on Agent Miller. He had been in quiet conversation with an IT manager over by the main server room. He was frozen, utterly and completely still. His hand was still raised in the middle of a gesture he'd been making. All the color had drained from his face, leaving it a pasty white. His eyes, which had been professionally distant and unreadable all day, were now wide with an emotion I could only describe as pure, undiluted terror. The laughter was gone. In its place was a chilling, terrible silence that screamed a single terrifying message. My life and Aisha's was about to change forever. The silence that fell over the office was a physical weight, pressing down on all of us. In the few seconds that it stretched, the entire world seemed to tilt on its axis. Mark and Brenda's confused expressions shifted as they glanced from Aisha's unervingly calm face to Agent Miller's mask of horror. You could see the precise moment that fear began to dawn on their faces. They knew, with dawning certainty, that they had tripped a hidden wire. They just had no idea it was connected to a bomb. Agent Miller recovered with a speed that was almost as unnerving as his initial paralysis. His professional mask slammed back down, but it was too late. I had seen the raw terror in his eyes. He gave a sharp, almost imperceptible nod to the IT manager he'd been speaking with, turned on his heel, and walked directly toward us. There was an urgent, predatory grace in his stride that made my heart hammer against my ribs like a trapped bird. "Ms. Harper," he said, his voice low, tight, and stripped of all pleasantries. "I need to speak with you and your daughter. Now." It was not a request. It was a command. He gestured with his head toward a small, glass-walled conference room nearby. My legs felt like lead as I numbly guided Aisha, my hand on her small back. As we passed Mark and Brenda, they physically recoiled, their gazes dropping to the floor as if they couldn't bear to meet my eyes. The second the conference room door clicked shut, Agent Miller's carefully constructed composure shattered. "Where did she hear that?" he demanded, his voice a harsh, desperate whisper. He paced the small room like a caged animal. The phrase, "The chimera sleeps in the house of Janus." Tell me where she heard it. "I don't know," I stammered, my mind reeling. "She's a kid. She says things. Maybe she heard it in a cartoon or a book, I have no idea." He stopped pacing and knelt, bringing himself down to Aisha's level. His entire demeanor shifted, the hardness in his face softening just slightly. "Aisha," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "My name is Agent Miller. Can you tell me where you heard those words? It's very important." She just shook her head, refusing to look at him, burying her face into my side and clutching my jacket. Miller stood up, running a hand through his hair. He looked haunted. "Ms. Harper, I'm not here for a routine security audit. That's a cover story. I'm leading a federal investigation into Sterling Price." My blood ran cold. An investigation into what? Financial fraud. He gave a short, bitter laugh that held no humor. "I wish it were that simple. What I'm about to tell you cannot leave this room. I need you to understand that. Your lives could depend on it." I could only nod, my throat too dry to form words. "We have strong reason to believe that Sterling Price is a front. It's the operational hub for a domestic human trafficking and corporate espionage ring. They're not just moving data through these servers, they're moving people. They create new identities, erase pasts, and surgically place assets into rival corporations, government agencies. You name it. The entire operation has a single, overarching code name: Project Chimera. Chimera. The word hung in the air, monstrous and unreal, like something from a nightmare. "The phrase your daughter spoke," Miller continued, his eyes boring into mine, trying to gauge my reaction, "is a deep cover communication protocol. It's a signifier phrase used only by the highest level operatives to identify each other. It's a phrase that, to our knowledge, has been dormant for 5 years. For a 10-year-old girl to know it. That's not just impossible, Ms. Harper. It's a ghost." He paused, letting the crushing weight of his words sink in. "I need to know everything about her adoption. Every document, every agency you went through, every name you can remember. And you need to understand this. The fact that she said it here in this building means you are both in incredible immediate danger. The people I'm hunting now know she's here. And worse, they know she remembers." He pulled a simple business card from his wallet and scribbled a number on the back with a pen. "This is my personal, secure, untraceable number. Call me if you see, hear, or remember anything, no matter how small. For now, you need to go back to your desk. You have to act normal. Get your daughter and go home as soon as you possibly can without raising suspicion. Don't talk to anyone about this. Not your friends, not your family. No one. Am I perfectly clear?" "Yes," I whispered, the single word barely audible. He opened the door and was gone, melting back into the office. I took Aisha's hand and led her back to our cubicle, feeling the eyes of the entire office tracking our every move. The rest of the day was an agonizing blur of forced normalcy, every keystroke a lie, every polite smile a mask for the terror churning in my stomach. If you're still here with me, don't forget to subscribe, activate notifications, leave your like, and share this video with someone. The drive home was a symphony of paranoia. Every set of headlights in my rearview mirror felt like a threat. Every car that lingered too long in my blind spot sent a fresh jolt of adrenaline through my system. I had a white-knuckled death grip on the steering wheel, while beside me, Aisha sat in a world of her own, quietly sketching in her book as if nothing had happened. The disconnect between her calm and my terror was making me dizzy. How could she be so serene after detonating a bomb in the middle of our lives? Once inside our apartment, with the deadbolt thrown and the security chain fastened, the feeling of being watched didn't go away. My home, once my sanctuary, now felt like a glass cage. I settled Aisha on the couch with her favorite animated movie and a bowl of popcorn, Then I went straight for the old, dented filing cabinet tucked away in the back of my closet. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the handle. I pulled out the thick folder simply labeled Aisha, Adoption. I had been through its contents 1,000 times over the years, but the documents were a fortress of blacked-out paragraphs and impenetrable legal jargon. A closed adoption, the agency had said. For her protection. Now that word, protection, sounded a lot like concealment. I spread the papers out across my bed, a collage of dead ends. The agency I'd used was now defunct. The social worker's name led nowhere. Then my fingers brushed against the thick, heavy cardstock of the final adoption decree. I'd always assumed the faint watermark embossed on the paper was the official state seal. But tonight, holding it up to the lamplight, I saw it clearly for the first time. It wasn't a state seal. It was a circular emblem of a head with two faces, one looking forward and the other looking back. Janus. The house of Janus. My breath caught in my throat. I ran to the living room and gently took Aisha's sketchbook from her lap. I flipped past her recent drawings of our cat and the swings at the park, and then I found them. Entire pages, filled with that same two-faced symbol, drawn over and over again obsessively. They were surrounded by long strings of numbers and letters. She wasn't just doodling. She was trying to remember. She was trying to write down the code of her own life. My hands trembled as I dialed the secure number Miller had given me. "It's Elena Harper," I whispered into the phone. "The Janus symbol. It's on her official adoption decree. It's a watermark. And it's all over her sketchbooks, along with codes or something." The line was silent for several long moments. When Miller finally spoke, his voice was heavy, grim. "Elena, you may have just confirmed my worst fears. The House of Janus isn't a physical place. It's a file. The Janus file. It's the master ledger for the entirety of Project Chimera. Every stolen identity, every horrific crime, every high-paying client. We've been hunting for it for years. If that symbol is on her official papers, it means her real identity is locked away inside that file." "What does that mean?" I asked, sinking onto the edge of my bed, the papers crinkling beneath me. "It means Aisha isn't random. She is a part of this. She's not a witness to it, she's evidence of it." For their most sensitive placements, the children of high-value targets or those being groomed for deep cover roles, they used a designer drug cocktail they called the Chimera Protocol. It was designed to suppress and permanently overwrite early childhood memories, to create a blank slate they could write on. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. My little girl, my shy, brilliant Aisha, had been subjected to that. "Your colleagues," Miller went on, his voice hardening, "Mark and Brenda. Their mockery today wasn't random office bullying. It was a probe. Calculated test. They were testing her, and you, to see if the old programming was beginning to break down." Her saying that phrase was a catastrophic failure in their eyes. It confirmed that she remembers something that she absolutely, under no circumstances, should. He took a heavy breath. "Elena, I need your help. My warrant won't get me into Sterling Price deep servers without tipping them off. They'd wipe everything in seconds. But you're an insider. You have access. I need you to go back into that office and find the Janus file. It's the only way to expose this entire network. And it's the only way to truly keep Aisha safe. That file will tell us who she really was, and why they took her." He was asking me to walk back into the lion's den, armed with nothing but a keyboard, to risk everything. But then I looked over at the sleeping child on my couch, a little girl whose entire history had been stolen and rewritten. The shame I had felt earlier in the office was nothing compared to the towering protective fury that washed over me now. They had hurt my daughter. They had violated her mind. And I was going to make them pay. "What do I have to do?" I asked, and my voice was no longer shaking. It was as cold and hard as steel. The plan was terrifying in its simplicity. I had to walk back into that office, find a single file hidden somewhere in petabytes of encrypted data on the company's central servers, download it and get out. The next morning I walked into an office so thick with tension it was practically suffocating. Mark and Brenda were shadows of their former selves, huddled together, silent. Their eyes, filled with a new, cold hostility, darted toward me every few seconds. They knew. Within the hour, my boss, Mr. Davenport, called me into his glass-walled office. His usual booming, backslapping cheerfulness was gone, replaced by a strained, thin smile. "Elena," he said, gesturing for me to sit. "Everything all right?" Yesterday seemed tense. This wasn't an expression of concern. It was a veiled threat. "Everything's fine, Mr. Davenport," I lied, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Aisha was just a little overwhelmed by the new environment. "Good," he said, his eyes studying my face, searching for any crack in my composure. "We value a harmonious work environment here at Sterling Price. We wouldn't want anything to disrupt that." For the rest of the day, I went through the motions, clicking through spreadsheets and pretending to analyze logistics data while my mind was racing, digging through the digital architecture of the company. I searched through old client folders, archived projects from years ago, anything that seemed out of place or long forgotten. The close calls were constant and nerve-shredding. At one point, a bright red security prompt flashed across my screen. "Admin access required. This attempt has been logged." My blood ran cold, and I was sure I was caught. Not a minute later, the same IT manager Miller had been talking to the day before walked slowly past my desk, his eyes lingering on my screen for a heart-stopping second before moving on. Was he one of them? Or was he one of Miller's people, a friendly in the shadows? Couldn't know. I couldn't trust anyone. Hours bled into one another. The office gradually emptied out until it was just me, the hum of the servers, and the distant rattle of the cleaning crew's cart. Under the guise of finishing a critical end-of-quarter report, I stayed, my search growing more frantic and desperate. Then I remembered a name from an old, defunct project file I'd seen months ago. Martin. It was so generic, so utterly forgettable, that I'd never thought twice about it. I found the archived master folder, a digital graveyard of corrupted files and dead links. But buried deep inside, nested within layers of seemingly empty folders, was a single password-protected subfolder. Contingency. My heart hammered against my chest. This had to be it. The password hint was a simple 3-word phrase. What was lost? My mind raced. I tried everything. Old client names, project code names, significant dates. Access denied. Access denied. Access denied. My hope began to dwindle. I was about to give up when my eyes fell on the small framed photo on my desk, a picture of me and Aisha laughing in the park on the day the adoption was finalized. What was lost? And then it hit me. Not as a thought, but as a ghost of a memory, painful and sharp. Cold, sterile hospital room. The smell of antiseptic. The faint, phantom melody of a lullaby I couldn't quite place. And a name. A name I was told, forced, and drugged to forget a decade ago. Lillian. My fingers trembled uncontrollably as I typed it into the password field, adding the project's surname as a desperate guess. Lyannemartin. I held my breath and hit enter. Access granted. The folder opened. Inside was one single, massive file. Janice.ledger. As I opened it, I realized it was a ledger of stolen lives. There were dozens of files on children and young adults, detailing how they were taken, their memories erased, and their new identities deployed. I saw the financials, the millions of dollars Sterling Price had made from this monstrous enterprise. And then I scrolled down and found the entry that shattered my entire world into a million pieces. It was my file. Elena Harper. It detailed in cold clinical terms my coercion into what was called a postnatal trauma and memory suppression trial 10 years ago. It described how a terrified, grieving young woman, me, had been manipulated into giving her newborn child up for adoption through a front agency that was a subsidiary of Project Chimera. It detailed the specific drugs they had given me to make me forget the name, the face, the very existence of my own daughter. And then I saw her file. Her real file. Her name was Lillian Martin. My Lillian. The file detailed her entry into the program, But it also contained a shocking addendum. 5 years ago, an FBI raid on a different facility had compromised the asset. The agent who found her, who pulled her from the system and laundered her into a legitimate, state-run adoption agency, was Agent Miller. He hadn't just been investigating Chimera all these years. He had been her guardian angel. The pieces didn't just fall into place. They slammed together with the force of an explosion. My adopting Aisha wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't fate. Miller had guided the process from the shadows, hoping that I, her biological mother, might be the subconscious key to breaking through the chemical conditioning. Mark and Brenda hadn't been testing Aisha yesterday. They were testing me, probing the fragile edges of my chemically shattered memory. I wasn't just some random analyst who had stumbled into a corporate conspiracy. I was at the very heart of it. The quiet, beautiful girl I had brought to work yesterday wasn't my adopted daughter. She was my biological child, stolen from my arms. And the man I thought was my potential savior was a ghost himself, trying desperately to save the one child he'd rescued while hunting the very monsters who had created her. Staring at that screen, at the monstrous, undeniable truth of my stolen past and my stolen child, something inside me finally broke. The fear, the anxiety, the years of making myself small and quiet, it all burned away in an instant, leaving behind nothing but pure, white-hot, incandescent rage. Just copying the file and sending it to Miller wasn't enough. Not anymore. Their crimes were committed here, under the bright, sterile, fluorescent lights of this corporation, and they were going to be exposed under them. My fingers, no longer shaking, flew across the keyboard. With a cold, terrifying clarity, I sent a single mandatory meeting invitation to Mr. Davenport, to Mark, to Brenda, and to every other senior executive whose name was listed in the Janus file. The subject line was simple: Emergency all hands, Project Chimera. The time 8 a.m. sharp. The location the main boardroom. Then I sent one last encrypted message to Miller. It had the entire Janus ledger attached and a single cryptic sentence. Boardroom, 8 a.m. Be ready. The next morning I walked into Sterling Price not as Elena the nobody, the office ghost, but as a woman with absolutely nothing left to lose. I walked directly to the main boardroom and entered at exactly 7:59 a.m. They were all there. Davenport at the head of the table, his face a mask of fury. Mark and Brenda, pale and sweating, looking like they were about to be sick. What is the meaning of this, Harper? Davenport boomed, his voice echoing in the silent room. This is an outrageous breach of protocol. I didn't answer him. I walked calmly to the head of the table, plugged my laptop into the main projector, and with a single click, the Janus file, with all their names, all their crimes, filled the giant screen behind me. The room went absolutely, deathly still. Project Chimera, I said, my voice ringing with a power and clarity that startled even me. A corporate espionage ring built on a foundation of stolen children, whose minds were systematically wiped with a drug cocktail you called the Chimera Protocol. You didn't just manage data in this building. You trafficked souls. I turned my gaze to Mark and Brenda. You were handlers. Your job was to test the assets for cracks in their programming, just like you tried to do with my daughter yesterday. Brenda let out a choked sob and covered her face with her hands. Then I looked directly at Davenport. And you ran the whole sick, twisted thing. You sold those children, those lives, to the highest bidder. He leaped to his feet, his face turning a blotchy, purple color. This is a fabrication. Lander. You're fired, Harper. Security. Get her out of here. At that exact moment, the boardroom doors burst open. Agent Miller stood in the doorway, flanked by a dozen FBI agents in full tactical gear. FBI. Nobody move. Miller's voice was like thunder, cracking through the chaos. It was over in seconds. Davenport's furious face collapsed in utter defeat. Mark made a desperate, clumsy run for a side exit and was tackled to the ground by an agent. As they cuffed a whimpering, defeated Mr. Davenport, his eyes met mine across the room. And for the very first time he actually saw me. The office furniture he never thought twice about had just brought his entire criminal empire crashing down around him. Sterling Price imploded. The arrests that day went far beyond our office, setting off a chain reaction that dismantled a vast, hidden network across the country. But for me, the real story wasn't in the headlines. It was in the quiet, fragile moments that came after. It was sitting in a sun-drenched park with my daughter, my Lily Ann. Agent Miller was with us that first day, explaining the impossible tightrope he'd walked for years, trying to build an airtight case while secretly protecting the one child he'd managed to pull from the fire. Her memory is still fractured. The drugs did their damage, and there are parts of her early life that may be lost forever. But sometimes, a particular smell on the breeze will trigger a phantom memory of a lullaby. Sometimes in the middle of the night she'll call me Mama in her sleep. We're two broken people, slowly, carefully being glued back together by a truth that proved to be stronger than any lie. The healing will take a lifetime. But for the first time we have a lifetime to do it together. They laughed at a quiet little girl and her invisible mother, never imagining that she held the key to their destruction and to my own salvation. They never bothered to look closer at the people they deemed insignificant. They never understood that sometimes, the quietest people are the ones who have survived the loudest storms. And their secrets, when finally spoken, have the power to bring down empires. Thank you for listening to my story. Please subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, comment below, leave your like, and share this video with others.